I enjoyed that night the other night. It was really good at the Cooper Union. That was good. And the book is really good. I've had a chance to read a good deal of it, but not all of it, but I congratulate you enormously.
Thanks a lot.
Look forward to this. We have a mutual link to the country of Bolivia.
Yeah.
As we spoke the other night. You're leaving town tomorrow? Tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm heading out of New York tomorrow. Heading up to Cooperstown.
All right. That's home territory for
That's
you?
where I grew up, yeah.
Okay.
Upstate New York.
Well, that's something to look forward to. And welcome very, very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to the program Benjamin or Ben Dangl.
Right.
And he's a writer, I would say a really very, very good writer who's gotten awards from the censorship, the media censorship and so forth. And he's a writer and he's a freelancer in a certain sense. And he's just returned. He's just in New York temporarily. We just called him at Cooper Union the other day. He's written a book. I want to show it right at the outset. It's called The Price of Fire, and the subtitle, maybe you can give us, Ben. What is the subtitle?
Resource Wars and Social Movements in Bolivia.
In Bolivia. He's returned from, he was down in Bolivia for quite a while. He's written on this, and he's written other material as well for, I think, the Z Nation. And well, we're going to get into that. And Ben, welcome very much to Conversation. Great pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Maybe you could share, you just mentioned Cooperstown, but maybe you could share your own background, where you were born and raised, and that sort of thing. And then we can wade into and talk about the book and Latin America, the state, the human condition, and that sort of thing. But where were you born and drug up and that sort of thing, if you would, please?
Yeah, I was born in Cooperstown, New York, upstate New York, small town where baseball was also invented, supposedly. There's a big museum up there.
Hall of Fame, yeah.
A lot of people know it because of baseball.
Uh-huh.
And I've been writing for a while, a number of years, since high school, pretty much. And since I've always been focusing on kind of politics, trying to shake things up in high school, in this small town. And when I left the country for the first time, about 19 years old, that's when I started to think about writing, working as a journalist full-time, and that's when I started thinking about writing about politics and more international, writing about the international scene a little bit more.
Right. Did you go to college and that sort of thing, or are you autodidactic, or do you educate yourself, or how?
Yeah, I educate myself. I went to Bard College
up
on the
yeah,
Hudson
sure,
River,
down Poughkeepsie,
studied writing there,
and
learned a lot about, studied poetry, fiction, journalism there.
Have you done poetry at all?
Yeah.
Yourself? Yeah, you do some poetry, right?
I used to. After I graduated, I switched kind of completely over to journalism. Maybe it was some kind of reaction to writing too much poetry or working too much on fiction. I wanted to kind of get into a little bit more factual stuff, and that's when I started working more on Latin America, traveling down there and writing.
Do you bill yourself a journalist, do you think, or would you say, fair to say, like maybe an independent journalist or something of that sort? Yeah, okay. And you become, because it's a different thing, journalism and novel or poetry is a different venue, right?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of, well, in this case, writing the book took a lot more research, whereas writing fiction in college, I can kind of think up anything and write about it without having to, check the facts, just writing, all kinds of fiction stuff. So with the book, I had to make sure I got the facts right and did a lot of interviews. And
yeah, right. Journalism is a different thing. I don't know which is the better way to do it. I saw Norman Mailer once said he thought that the best way to present reality was the novel, because you have a freedom to do whatever and make it, because it's all sort of, it's all a matter of interpretation and that sort of thing. But anyway, the journalism is, did you study journalism then, or were you trained in journalism, or did you sort of pick it up? Because you're really, I'm here to say you're really very, very good. The writing is very good and very journalistically, it has great integrity and so forth.
Well, thanks a lot.
No, it's true. Yeah.
I've been writing poetry, fiction, and articles since I was in high school, and I learned a lot about writing in college, but journalism has always kind of been a part of my life since I was about 15 years old. But in college, it was on the sidelines. I focused on poetry and fiction. And like I said, I got a little burnt out on fiction in college, writing it so much. When I graduated, I felt that journalism and writing about particularly issues in Latin America was refreshing to me. So
How did you come to focus on Latin America? You're up in Cooperstown, and you could have focused on Eskimos or
Yeah.
NATO or something. But Latin America, how did you get an interest in Latin America, if I may?
Well, I traveled down there as a backpacker, a tourist, in
Uh-huh.
2001 for the first time. And I came into Bolivia over the border from Peru in an area that you're familiar with,
Yeah.
around Lake Titicaca,
Uh-huh.
and ran to a road blockade along the highway that goes into La Paz. And people were throwing rocks at our bus. The blockades were, 3 feet off the highway. No buses were going through, and I was totally shocked and surprised at what was going on there, why people were throwing rocks at people they didn't know. And it kind of opened up my mind, and I thought, what the heck is going on here in Bolivia?
Yeah.
So I started reading the newspapers, reading books, asking more questions about Bolivia while I was there, particularly about what people were protesting about in this case, and the coca growing going on in Bolivia.
Right.
And shortly after, I went to Argentina in a study abroad program, right at the time when the Argentine crisis happened, 2001, 2002.
Awful.
Overnight.
They were turning over presidents almost on a weekly basis.
Right,
there for
about
a while.
5 presidents in about
mess,
2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it was a very tumultuous time,
Absolutely.
and I was shaken up.
It must have been wrenching to the Argentine people what happened in that in that period.
They went from kind of first world to, quote, third world overnight. A lot of people who were wealthy woke up one morning without any money, with no money to...
Let me back up a little bit, okay? Let me back up, because you're political. You became political. I mean, poetry can be beauty for beauty's sake, or art or something, but have you always been, or when did you pick up being political? And I see from your index you got a whole lot of references to Chomsky and to Zen and to a lot of what would be seen as progressive political. You seem to be very steeped in it. Were you always political or not? Or, when did you pick up that political thing? And then secondly, of all the places in the world where you might have found yourself in 2001, you happen to be Peru, Bolivia. It could have been Cambodia. It could have been Africa. It could have been, how did it happen to be there? But first of all, the politics. When did you pick up on the politics and movement politics or activists and writing censored stories that are censored, that sort of thing? Well, good.
Well, my parents were radical for Cooperstown.
Radical,
radical Democratic, Democratic Party. Not radical in the as radical as Chomsky, but radical compared to most people in Cooperstown. So I grew up kind of left of the norm in my hometown of 2,000-3,000 people. So that from the start kept me engaged and kept me with a kind of critical mind about local politics, particularly about politics within the small school system that I was in. So whereas later on I learned more about politics on the the international level, growing up my activism was based on more kind of anti-authoritarian,
It's a good beginning.
Yeah, in a small town, kind of rebelling against the teachers who I saw as bad, the principals who were too hard or too. I found high school to be a very overstructured place.
I know what
and
you
then
mean.
I kind of when I got to college, it was a big. Creatively a lot more exciting and open. So
I was the same way when I was growing up, And I got a friend, I just told him up there, Wendell and that. A lot of people, I got a thing up on my wall in my house and everything. It says, how do you tell the difference between a high school and prison? It's a little hard. And a lot of the people that are in the high school see it as a part of a minimal security correctional facility that links into the prison system, because it's trying to get people to cotton, to have a mind where they will accept an authority figure to do what they're told by an authority figure, perhaps to fit them into cubicle corporatism and systems like that, I can see the connection, and a lot of your fellows see it that way too, or And if you're anti-authoritarian, you've been born into the wrong world, because practically all of the established institutions are authoritarian.
Right,
Does it seem that way to you?
I agree.
Sounds to me like you're a little anarcho. Perhaps.
I'd say I'm politically confused, learning as I go. Every time I learn something, my ideology changes a little bit. But the fighting against that system in public school was similar to fighting against, the Bush administration, against international institutions. It's the same kind of structure of trying to make people obedient, trying to make, seeing education as a factory to produce,
compliant workers.
working citizens. Yeah.
Wage slaves, the Marxists would call them.
Yeah.
Might be on a world scale. That's the way it's really structured. I mean, it seems that way,
So that's where it started,
Yeah.
and then it was just political on an everyday sense. And then when I went to college and started to learn more about the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and traveling around, I traveled a lot. Went to India for in actually sophomore year of college, and
that would have been what year?
99.
99, just
2000.
before you were getting
Yeah,
you
so
were in India. You
so traveling
had some spell of time there, or a short time, or what?
about 6 months.
Oh, it's 6 months. Quite a bit of time. Where were you? What part?
In Delhi, Jaipur, Varanasi. So the poverty and the poverty there shook me up a lot. So these traveling experiences kind of took me to another level as far as any kind of political, social consciousness.
Were you backpacking that also?
Yeah, I was backpacking. Bard College had loose enough rules that I was able to study abroad a couple of times.
That was part of an academic program you were involved in with there? Okay,
yeah.
Well, that's a way to get overseas. If you can't find a tramp steamer,
take care of college credits and
you take care of college credits and also have a Valderie, Valderai. I don't suppose you know that song. No. That's because the people in Europe, the young people in Lederhosen, they would go wandering. I love to go wandering across the mountainside. I mean, Valderie, Valderai. It's the wanderlust, or the wanting to move out and see part of the world was part of your consciousness.
Yeah. Totally.
There was a book I read when I was young called The Royal Road to Romance, and it was all about Halliburton, I think is his name, and he'd written a book about how wonderful it is for young people to go out and see the world and adventure out past the corner store and that kind of thing. You had that sort of apparently in your consciousness.
Yeah, because breaking out of the small town mentality, those experiences really opened up my mind.
Right, and at the dinner table you had interesting conversations about the world. It wasn't all just about Bendix washers and things. You had interesting, your parents and so forth were interested in the world.
My grandparents,
That's good. They helped shake you in that. Now we have so you were there 6 months, quite a long time in India and so forth. And then what decided you at that context that in 2001, there'd been the things in Iraq, all that kind of, what prompted you to go and be on the Titicaca, on the shores of Lake Titicaca between Peru and Bolivia? How did you happen to arrive at the shores of Lake Titicaca, of Lake Titicaca and the border of Peru and Bolivia in that year in 2000, or that month in 2001?
Well, I initially went down the same reason a lot of backpackers go down now. The continent is inundated with a lot of backpackers from Europe and the U.S. And I went down for an adventure to see what it was like to meet new people, with a relatively apolitical perspective at that point. I was just kind of backpacking,
like a tourist.
Interested, to see, hike the mountains, meet people, and it was those experiences in the road blockades in Bolivia and the economic crisis in Argentina, where I studied that semester. So I was on my way to Argentina.
You were on your way to Argentina
to study.
As you went through Peru, Bolivia.
Right. I flew.
Why didn't you go straight to Buenos Aires in the aeroplane?
Well, I was studying in Mexico for a month just to learn Spanish. Now, before I went, I was in a program at college to learn Spanish. So that's another reason.
College?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Another reason why I went down there. And then I decided to just fly from Mexico to Peru and take buses and hike down to Buenos Aires.
You flew to Lima.
Right.
And then you went through Arequipa.
Right.
And you did that on buses and so forth? And then up, did you get Sorochi? As you came up the thing at the 12,000 feet at the Altiplano, or did you get mountain sickness or anything?
Yeah, sure,
You did, yeah.
In Peru, in La Paz.
In 1963, when I was even more foolish than I am, if you can imagine. I can't imagine it anything, but anyway, I was young and a PhD dissertation candidate and all that sort of thing. And my wife and I at the time, it was wonderful. We had an old 53 Pontiac. Beautiful car, best car ever. It was like a tank and everything. And we just went and knocked out the back seat and made a platform and everything. And we drove from Detroit, Michigan to La Paz, Bolivia, which was a fool's errand and everything. We had lots of flat tires, but you don't care. But so I know that route well. But we drove all the way down there to La Paz, and I spent 1.5 years, 2 years actually, in Bolivia. So we have a commonality in that. You've ended up spending quite a bit of time in Bolivia.
Right.
Right, and so that's interesting. We have that common among the Aymara people. that great ancient civilization. That's what I was studying as a doctoral candidate, wrote a paper on that and everything. So we have that common interest. And I'm really happy about the recent political developments in the country of Bolivia with Evo Morales that's coming. And so we want to get to all that. So you're there, you're as a tourist, more or less, in Bolivia, wondering about the roadside. So spell it out for us a little bit, what you came to find out and what you know, your thoughts about it and how you came to spend so much time and interest in Bolivia.
Yeah, so those protests shook me up, opened my eyes to the plight of a lot of people in Bolivia, in the drug war, in the exploitation, corporate exploitation in Bolivia, and mining, gas industry.
Yeah.
So that kind of brought me to another level politically as far as my political interests, and that was part of the switch from fiction to journalism. I started becoming more interested in finding out what was going on in Bolivia and what were the causes of the economic crisis in Argentina. It was hard to ignore these things while I was traveling through there. It wasn't a simple joyride. It pushed me to pay attention to the bigger picture and find out what the U.S. government was doing in Bolivia, what the International Monetary Fund was doing in Argentina. And that was kind of the point of no return as far as
I see. And did I hear you were on your way to Buenos Aires? You were going to study in Buenos Aires at an academic situation or something, or?
Yeah, I ended up studying in Mendoza, Argentina.
Mendoza, yeah, that's a horse country.
Horse country, wine country.
Yeah, beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, it was a very nice,
nice
place to study. I was there. The university was on strike most of the time, so I didn't end up studying that much in the classroom, but I learned an awful lot living there at the time.
How long were you there?
About 6 months.
And it was during the time of the turmoil in
Argentina. Right, factory occupations, neighborhood assemblies, and people
cooperative attempts and everything.
Right,
because
people
the
were
system
forced
fell apart. I mean, it was awful, as I understand it, and that's the way you found it.
Yeah, people were forced to develop relationships with their neighbors, organized for sometimes the first time in their lives, and a lot of unions became involved. A lot of people who were just living the high life were forced to look for ways to survive, find food, work with each other to survive in their neighborhoods, and it woke a lot of people up in Argentina.
And it was the result of the dictates of the International Monetary Fund that led to that crisis, do you think? Or maybe you could share with it. It was an important development. And also, how have things happened since? How are things in Argentina these days and everything like that? But share with us, what was the reason? Why was it that we went through that turmoil? And a lot of good people lost just basic security and so forth. So, I mean, maybe you could spell it out a little bit. Then we want to get to Bolivia in detail.
Yeah. And Argentina has been a long time lab rat of neoliberal economics, which focuses on the corporate control of resources, public services, slash in public salaries, kind of an anti-union economic system. And in Argentina, that economic system was met with was very welcomed by the presidency of Carlos Menem throughout the 90s. And he privatized the telephone system, electric system, the airlines, and it was kind of a corporate free-for-all, so that a lot of the money was leaving the country to corporations based in Europe and the U.S. And there was a peg of the peso was pegged to the dollar for a number of years in Argentina, which created this house of cards which crashed in 2001. The peso to the dollar created wealth for a long time, but it wasn't economically stable for throughout the 90s, and the lie was exploded into this economic crisis. 2001.
The neoliberal thing. I don't know if that could be informed by like Friedman and some of the people out of the Chicago school and that sort of thing, where they're going to do that, and the structural adjustment that they were going to do in the name of some market fundamentalism that was running sort of strong in our government. It was coming out of Rome on the Potomac in a certain sense, and then from there the school of Chicago. Or what was it that was informing that whole neoliberal thing as you see it that became to a head in 2001 in Argentina?
Yeah, the Chicago boys, this economic idea that was pushed to a head.
Chicago boys, you use the term, the Chicago boys, right.
In Chile, Brazil, Argentina, this was all an idea that the freer the markets operated, the freer the society would be. And of course, it's proven to be wrong in Latin America, where this ended up clamping down on a lot of people's civil liberties, workers' rights. And right now in Latin America, there's a shift to more state control of the economy, state intervention in the economy,
Morales,
state control of
Chavez,
natural resources.
Yeah, I think in Ecuador now.
Yeah.
And they had a close go in Peru. So it seems to be there's beginning to be a lot of action in Latin America, which is really interesting. But that was also the structural adjustment that the IMF would require. Often worked havoc on the poor people involved, all in the name of some sort of a thing like a market fundamentalism, almost like a religious commitment to the private sector and that sort of thing. And that you find is part of the neoliberal model, which is something that could be critiqued in broad general political terms, not only in Latin America, but the world.
Right. Yeah, the IMF officials would come into Argentina and say, we have a plan, we have a recipe to fix this situation, this economic crisis. Privatize this industry, slash public salaries in this area.
Forget
open up the environment, up the economy to more investments. That'll fix everything. And if you do this, we'll give you more loans. That was basically what happened. And they, Argentina, Bolivia, a lot of leaders in these countries did everything the IMF said for loans, privatized water systems. And it created a disaster over the last 30 years.
Not only in Latin America, Africa, a lot of the countries of the world where they're calling all that stuff, and it was just disastrous for the people, and it was a market fundamentalism. I know they had the same thing in Bolivia. Mr. Sachs, right?
Right, Jeffrey Sachs.
Jeffrey Sachs, the man who brought you shock therapy in the Soviet Union and created kleptocracy all over the place and so forth. It was to try and get at these principles and so forth. He's now trying to be on the side of the masses of the people. But in the whole, the economic systems by which this planet is supposed to operate do not and have not throughout history served the people, the masses, very well. And I wonder if you think we're on that we're at a mode of transition now, because everything in a certain sense is being tested in a new way. I mean, you've got this reaction now that's happening in Bolivia with Evo Morales and so forth, and you've been covering that. After Argentina, you're covering that. Then did you find your way up to Bolivia, or did you travel around a little bit, Brazil and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we traveled in Bolivia for a while. Came back to Bolivia at various times, and worked there a lot in 2003 when there was a big movement against the privatization and exportation of Bolivia's gas reserves.
Yeah, that's a big issue now.
Yeah,
sure.
Bolivia has the second largest natural gas reserves in Latin America, and they've been privatized and nationalized off and on over the last century.
Yeah, it goes back and forth, right? Yeah.
Right, depending on who was in charge, what government was in power, what military dictatorship was in power. And in 2003, there was another move to privatize the gas even further and export it to the U.S. for a very low price.
And also to Brazil, I think.
Yeah, Brazil, Argentina.
Brazil got a pipeline, didn't they? Or try to, or want to, or something?
Yeah, Brazil's one of the biggest importers of Bolivian gas.
Yeah.
So is Argentina, and this plan in 2003 was to expand that, expand that exportation and expand what many Bolivians saw as the looting of one of the last natural resources left in Bolivia.
Right, they've looted everything else. Potosi, you have a great chapter on Potosi and the Rico Mountain and that, and how the silver from there had built the empire and the Aymara Indian peoples, the indigenous people and the Quechua and the Guarani, I guess, and everything, but particularly the Aymara. That's who I lived among and wrote my program, my paper about. But they've suffered so grievously for 400 to 500 years ever since Pizarro. It seems to me that's the way it was when I was there in '63 and '67, and it seems to be the case as well for a long time. They've been suffering. The program that aired yesterday, as we talk now, this is on Thursday. We were playing program. I'm re-airing a program I did with Tomas Kandari, who is a close friend of Evo Morales, and he's talking about the encomiendo. He said it was worse than slavery. I mean, the conditions under which the people had been submitted throughout the history of that country is now perhaps being tested by the presidency of Evo Morales, and it's maybe even more relevant than what's going on in Venezuela with Chavez and so forth. But I'm talking, you know what I'm saying? Is that more or less something you would think makes part of what you're about in the book and so forth?
Yeah,
Or am
the
I
book.
getting off base? I don't know.
Yeah, the book focuses on the last 6 years of social movements in Latin America, in
Right.
Bolivia.
Yeah.
It talks a lot about the history in Potosí and in the Revolution of 1952 and various indigenous struggles with Tupac Katari against colonialism with the Spanish. But I focus on the social movements that led up to the Morales administration and created this kind of radical space for Evo to be elected in 2005, and a lot of their demands are still being played out as Evo governs this past year, 2006. And so what a lot of people see right now with the Morales administration is an opportunity to reverse these 500 years of exploitation, racism, looting of natural resources.
It's deep-seated. It's deep-seated.
Yeah, it's a very difficult institutional situation to change that Evo's trying to do. So
it's very, the population is very heavily Aboriginal. I don't know, maybe it wasn't particularly, I mean, the Altiplano is pretty harsh. And, you know, there's 1,200 feet in elevation. It's pretty harsh and everything. There weren't that many. It's like Costa Rica. No, there weren't that many Europeans. I mean, it was heavily, and yet the Europeans have ruled all the time.
Right.
And so now you've got a thing based among the people, which is very encouraging. You had a thing, I've had some people talk about Latin America. We had three major revolutions in the modern era. We had, well, Mexico, the Mexican Revolution, then you had the Cuban Revolution, and then you had also, some people put it in the thing when Paz Astanzaro and the Movimiento Nacional came. Do you think that the things that were the ground was being laid for something like Evo to emerge with Paz Astanzaro and the things that happened in 1952, I think, is when that revolution happened? And how do you comment on that revolutionary movement that was instigated by Paz Astanzaro?
Yeah, Paz Astanzaro and the National Revolutionary Movement, the MNR party, allied with miners, campesinos, rural farmers, workers around the country to overthrow the Bolivian dictatorship, which was not democratically elected. They overthrew him.
The Bolivian dictatorship de jure.
In 1952. And they afterwards redistributed land, granted the right to vote to a majority of the population.
That was important because they had not been able to vote until then.
Right. 80% of the people were brought into the electorate. And
if they had not been able to vote, Evo Morales could not be the president of Bolivia, making all that trouble against good corporate Americans. Right?
Yeah, and this was just 50 years ago, so it's not that long ago.
That's right, that's right.
And the mines were nationalized, gas was nationalized, and this history of state control of natural resources and a kind of socialistic vision has a lot to do with Evo's popularity, and not just Evo, but Evo is part of this national movement of coca farmers, landless peasants, campesinos, miners, neighborhood councils in El Alto. So Evo is part of a very large movement around the country that voted him into power.
Do you think it grows out of the Astanzaro days or not? Do you see a connection?
I think it does. I think there's an enormous connection. Yeah, with the miners. The miners were very active in revolts in 2003.
It was a real revolution that was being attempted in '52.
Yeah, like and that's Cuba. Part of people's radical history. It's part of their consciousness right now. When people protest, maybe I'd say similar to the 60s in Vietnam, people think back to those days against the Vietnam War. When we march now against Iraq, people have this historical consciousness about the 1952 revolution. They think back to those days
in Bolivia.
In Bolivia,
they do. They have that. Okay.
Yeah, when the government was overthrown, when the mines were nationalized, and I think that the same way that the 60s play into our current activism now and how we think about that, people think about that. The revolution in 1952 and other movements in the 60s and 70s against dictatorships. So that revolution was very important in the revolts in 2003, 2005 against privatization, corporate looting. It was against the same systems of international capitalism and corporate domination in the 50s, the same systems that people were fighting against now in recent years.
And yet, Astanzaro and that movement, it got things done, but other things came back I mean, the old pattern was asserting itself like it has a tendency to do, to where finally you needed him to come down, Mr. Sachs to come down and deal with inflation, that sort of thing. And it seemed to be very much like a neoliberal model that he was going to propose upon that country, because inflation. So the old patterns were able to assert themselves, and the European ascendancy was still there. And Pazza Stanzaro was a European-based member of that aristocracy. So, but beginnings come from there's a linkage and everything. But Evo is truly, honest to God, from poverty, Aymara, Indian background, and that's a major development in a country that's overwhelmingly Aymara, well, in Quechua and Guwani. But that's a major development because that's an indigenous culture that's been able to assert itself in a way that's really significant. I think it's a major development. Yeah. I don't know if you see it that way, but it's a major development on the world scale.
Yeah, fighting against racism in a way. People see Evo as an example of what, what's possible, possibly.
For the Aymara people.
For the Aymara, for the Quechua.
Who've always been thought of as like slaves. I mean, it was, it's
up to very recently, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And so there's that very big change that's happening.
And there were lingerings after that even. There were still lingerings of that. I mean, those things don't change overnight when you've got a class thing like that.
Oh, totally. It's been rich white men in charge of the country for years.
It's been rich white men that have been in charge of the world,
right,
and so forth. And so maybe there's something stirring to where the people of the world who have been ill-served from Rome on, and so forth, it seems to me that there's something stirring, blowing in the wind or something, that a real movement that's going to serve the people, that the neoliberal or the neoconservative, whatever models they're going to come up with for running the spaceship Earth and the planet, is not serving the interests of the masses, and maybe something stirring that's going to be able to, at long last, serve and bring in the people, the masses, which are not served now. Do you see things revolutionary that way, or that kind of need?
I think
that kind of change is needed.
I think that kind of change is needed. I think
the
it's
models
happening.
are out of date. The models that we try to operate with by our so-called legitimate authorities on this planet are out of date, like an Anjant regime. You see it that way? You have a revolutionary context based upon the need to serve the interests of the people who've been screwed over.
Yeah, and that's the way. Yeah, that's the way things are going in Bolivia. I wouldn't say that it's totally, revolutionary right now. I wouldn't say that Evo is the end-all answer to all this history of exploitation.
But it's good to have something based among the Aboriginal people.
Totally, yeah.
You know what
a lot of people see it as a great time of hope.
That's even different, it seems to me, in Venezuela.
Right.
I mean, it's much more based upon, and it's interesting to me, if I may, it's interesting because that culture is probably close on to 5,000 years. That culture, that Aymara culture, is not just a Johnny-come-lately. They had a civilization at the time of Christ that rivaled the old world in the art and so forth, and it was based upon a different thing. And they had made an agricultural revolution. They had made a civilization that goes back 4,600 years. So it's an ancient culture that's been very completely dominated by the colonization, and that's a metaphor that can come up in other places too, that the European imposition of their system, which they call themselves legitimate, whether it's under colonialism or neoliberal models of, post-colonial control. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the movements, if they could get the Aboriginal peoples of the Americas stirred up, maybe we could get something going to serve their interests, because they've been so ill-served.
Yeah, and Bolivia is 60% indigenous.
Absolutely.
So that's a majority.
And they've got a president now for the first time ever. Now that's really good news to my way of thinking, and you too see it that way.
Yeah, I think that there's
we ought to talk some about this man, right?
Yeah, I think there's people are re-evaluating indigenous culture in Bolivia. There's less of a demonization of indigenous culture in the media, and people are kind of taking another look at their roots, music, customs in Bolivia now.
I understand they got Aymara hip-hop. We're going to have an example of it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, but they are doing that. Right. Have you ever read, I read every year 1984. I think every year I manage to get Orwell's 1984, and just to keep in touch and everything. But I also read the biography of Cecil Rhodes, who was in Africa. And the racism of the 19th century was absolutely incredible, The white man's burden, that idea, that still permeates the thinking of the so-called leaders of this world, and they don't have we don't have an association that includes all of the people the way we don't have a just or appropriate order or way of organizing things that would seem to be that the future requires, if we're not going to blow this whole thing up in some sort of a stupid mafia don war with each other about, you know, but the racism is there, and that there can be a spark coming out of Latin America is very encouraging based upon this unique culture.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of changes are happening.
Talk to me some about this man, Evo, okay? He comes out, you said he was up on the Altiplano. That's a very tough environment, and they were dirt poor.
He grew up in the Altiplano, and like a lot of poor farmers in the Altiplano, he migrated.
Which most of them were.
Yeah, he migrated to the Chapare, a coca-growing area
it's
in
down
the
like
center
near Cochabamba
of the country. Yeah, he went there, and a lot of people moved to the Chapare to grow coca.
Yeah,
coca is chewed as a stimulant, as a pain reliever. Very popular in Bolivia, the same way coffee is here.
Yeah.
And there's a vast legal market for coca leaves.
Is there a similarity in your thinking? I mean, I remember they used to have these big coca bags in the market. They would be selling the coca in the market.
The same way now.
It still is, right?
Yep.
Now, there's some people who want to put the kibosh on that because coca is the basis of cocaine.
Right.
And there are the interests of the coca growers is one that's interesting there. That's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, so Evo moved to the Chapare in the 1980s and with thousands of other poor farmers to start growing coca when there was a larger demand for the leaf. And he started to fight against the militarization of that area. The U.S. government, in its war on drugs, focuses on the eradication of the coca leaf instead of going towards dealing with the drug issues on the supply side.
Yes,
they go right down. A lot of cocoa farmers would say it's kind of like
a huge industry, isn't it? Because there's a lot of coke done in North America, isn't it?
Right.
CIA used to smuggle it in during the Contra thing. It was them doing it. Yeah.
So a lot of cocoa farmers would say the drug war is focusing on kind of eradicating the grape instead of working with the wine. You know, we're going right to the this initial phase of drug production, and
trying to do the same thing up in Colombia too, right?
Yeah,
a lot of the Plan Colombia, where they're putting all that money in there to do it, to try and burn up, So that's a dialectic that's really interesting, right? Because you have a lot of people who have an interest in coca, and how are you going to do as well? But it's then illegal. It's thought of illegal in the world scale. So that's interesting. And he was in support of the coca growers out of his own experience, right?
Right, and he was involved in a union in the Chapare to fight against the militarization of this area and for, the coca growers' right to grow the coca leaf, live in peace. And these unions developed to organize the legal coca market and organize eventually.
The legal coca market is different than the illegal coca market?
Well,
how does that dynamic work there? Yeah.
The coca production in the Chapare is very controlled by the union. Outside of the
Union of Coca Growers?
The Sixth Federation of the Tropics, it's called, the Tropics of Cochabamba. And though the union controls all aspects of the coca production and the markets that bring the coca into cities to sell.
And who heads
legally.
up the union? Who is the union represented?
Well, Evo continues to be the president of the union of the coca.
It's a political base.
It's a union. It's a union that over the years in the 80s and into the 90s developed a political party called the Movement Towards Socialism.
Isn't that interesting?
To fight against the the horrible anti-coca policies that were going on. So it was a matter of life or death for a lot of coca farmers. They had to change these political policies in the government in order to continue growing coca, in order to live in peace. There were a lot of pesticides used against the coca. Military would come in, pull up all the crops, beat up people, shoot people in order to end the coca production and end the war on drugs. But as more money, more militarization has been poured into Bolivia, the amount of cocaine on U.S. and European streets remained the same. So obviously there's something or worse, or more. So obviously there's something wrong with the war on drugs in Bolivia, and Evo was fighting against these horrible policies. And so over the years it developed into a political party.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's interesting. A political party of coca growers.
Right. Exactly. And
Could you have the same political party of marijuana growers if you had a marijuana thing going, or is there?
Sure, I think there are.
Why don't they have a political party of marijuana growers who said they should be able to grow marijuana? People should use it if they want. But you got these vested interests that have political ramifications, right? And a worldview that's different, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
So
anyway, it's interesting. That was that was his base.
that was his. That's how he came into politics. Was through the union and eventually through the movement towards socialism, which started as a base, as a political instrument. He calls it for the coca growers, and it expanded.
Growers, yeah.
It expanded throughout Bolivia among miners, campesinos, and the coca leaf was always used as a symbol for this party.
Isn't that interesting?
Because
huh?
it's a leaf that was used. The
By
miners,
Incas,
the miners chew it
Yeah,
when
sure.
when they work. Campesinos chew it when they work. It's used in ceremonies. So it was a symbol that Andean people all over the Andes could relate to.
Right.
And it was also a symbol against U.S. imperialism, because there you
isn't
have
that
the
interesting?
militarization. So that leaf continues to be a very powerful symbol that has all of those, where all these forces kind of come together.
That's right, and people have economic interest in that because they can do it. Now, what about the thing where you get the coca that's growing, you got a little meadow or something, and then it goes and it gets into international trade, and you got drug trafficking, and it's bringing it in and smuggling it in. That's a different kind of dynamic. And how do the coca growers, you can grow coca, but somehow that coca is made into paste and into cocaine, and then it's smuggled. What about all of that? And how did the coca arrows, is that what you call them?
Cocaleros.
Cocaleros. Okay,
Cocaleros, the coca farmers.
I remember they used to have a thing called a chuspa or something. It was a thing that everybody wears, and that's where they kept the coca leaves that they would just choose, the amara, and then they'd use little limestone or something to get. But,
Right.
But what about that dynamic between the coca growers and the illegal trade and smuggling of cocaine into, say, New York and Los Angeles and so forth?
It takes a lot of coca leaves to make a small amount of cocaine.
Okay.
So beyond that, there are a lot of chemicals are needed to produce cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the information I have, about 70% of the coca production in Bolivia goes to legal markets.
What's
And
a
the
legal
rest-
market for cocaine?
Well, not cocaine. The
Not
coca
cocaine,
leaf.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
coca. What's the legal market? What's the difference?
The legal market for coca is chewing the coca leaf
Yeah, everybody
among
chews
workers.
a coca leaf.
It's very popular in tea,
Uh-huh.
shampoo, cookies,
Shampoo?
medicines. All kinds of products
Coca
are being
shampoo?
right. Yeah.
Really? Mm.
Wine, all kinds of products are being made now from coca. It's not that the markets outside of tea and chewing it aren't that large, but they're growing. And
All
Ava
right.
is trying to expand
And that
those
was
markets.
something that was used in Coca-Cola.
Yep.
Back a long
Back-
time
yeah.
ago. Yeah.
Yep,
But I don't legal
So
market. So there's legal. Can we go down to Union Square and buy coca leaves?
It's
now?
not legal in the States.
What,
The
it's not legal to
UN,
import
the
it?
United Nations voted to say that the coca leaf is illegal and that it's illegal to transport it around the world outside of Bolivia, outside of Peru. So
Bolivia,
that
Peru
was in
only.
50.
You can't grow it. You can't grow it in Colombia.
You can grow the
They're
leaf
burning it up
legally,
and stuff.
nationally, and there's certain amounts per country that are legal to grown in as far as the U.S.
Was the
Embassy is
coca
concerned.
always legal in Bolivia, or did that have to be fought for to see this coca legal market, as you
Right.
call it? Was that because everybody, when I was there in '63, everybody was chewing coca.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I mean, they did. So it was
coca's
just
been a part of the culture for centuries in
Right.
the Andes.
and it was always thought it was always legal.
It's always legal. Yeah.
It was legal
Chewing
to
coca,
chew. Now,
chewing
what
coca.
made the distinction between it and the cocaine, or the you understand? The thing
Right.
where the real money is.
Well, there was a stronger demand for cocaine in the 80s, in
Yeah.
1980s, and so that coincides with the closure. Jeffrey Sachs came into Bolivia in the 1980s and said, we have to privatize the mines, and he worked with the government to shut down the mines, and that sent a lot of miners out of work into the streets, and they migrated to the Chapare.
Uh-huh.
That closure of the mines coincided with the new demand for cocaine in the U.S.
Really?
So the coca was grown then,
Mhm.
went to a lot of cocaine production in the 80s. And now the interesting thing is that whereas the repression of coca farmers happened and the violence against coca farmers happened in areas that were controlled by unions,
Uh-huh.
the actual cocaine was being produced in isolated areas of the jungle in Bolivia and in Colombia,
Right.
so that where a lot of the force against coca production was happening against the legal markets that were going to
Legal
markets to going to tea, chewing coca, and so the wrong people were being intercepted and repressed.
But
And
was the legal market limited in size? You do a little garden like you have lettuce and carrots and coca. I mean, a
Yeah,
little
it's
thing
about
like you're doing herbs or something, or were there large amounts that were done, and was the distribution of it was the legal coca industry large? I mean.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah, right now the legal production per family is about a third, the size of a third of a football field, about. So you
Really?
can grow that, yeah, legally,
And
and you
if
can
you try to
harvest
grow
it.
more than that, you're in doo-doo?
Right. What's so interesting
Because
that's
they
happening
assume,
now under
yeah.
AVO is a cooperative eradication effort. So whereas before the police and the military would come in, violently eradicate crops, burn down crops, now there's more of an understanding between among the union members to voluntarily eradicate the coca that is outside of their legal production.
They do that with
camp.
tobacco in this country too,
Mm-hmm.
and they used to do it really down in Kentucky because it was so valuable, the tobacco. They would have pictures of people doing it, or you got poppies in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
The same kind of dynamic is there or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all being, the legal thing, it's interesting what makes it legal. They're just sort of saying that like that is something, that's a big issue, but it was a political base for him. And actually, he's representing the people there. And then he became elected in what year? We got to talk to
2005. He was elected December 2005 in a landslide victory against Jorge Quiroga, and he since his on his campaign trail he promised nationalization of the gas reserves, redistribution of land, a assembly to rewrite the country's constitution, and more peace in the Chapare for coca growers, among a large amount of other
that's still a big
platforms.
issue. That coca issue is still a big
Still
one?
a very big issue.
And
yeah.
the coca leaf still the symbol of the party?
Still the symbol for
Isn't
the
that
party.
it? They could have
yeah.
the coca, the cross, because you have the coca leaf and the marijuana. They could be crossed or something like that. But those are two things. And yeah, one of the things is, one of the problems is, it's really interesting. I love Bolivia. I was there, and I'm really happy to see what's going on. I think it could be a spark for other parts of the world if we can get things together, if we can ever get a system which is going to be really serving the people in a way that's required. One of the problems is we don't have enough time because it's too interesting. And I know you brought in a clip, a video clip, of some music or something, and we know we want to get that in. So maybe we could try to set that up, as they say. You brought in music about some hip-hop or something? Or
Great,
maybe
yeah.
you could talk to that when we get that in.
So, well, my book...
Make sure we get it
So
in.
the book focuses on a lot of different social groups in Bolivia, activist groups, social movements, cocaleros, landless farmers, and one of the groups I focused on in the book was a group of young hip-hop artists in El Alto, Bolivia, which is
it's above La Paz.
Above La Paz in the Altiplano, in a rapidly expanding population. And Abraham Bajorquez is the artist that's that'll play in this clip. And their music focuses on a lot of the police repression in the 2003 gas war. El Alto, the city, was a focal point for this movement for the gas nationalization and against the repressive government of Gonzalo Sanchez de Lozada. So when you'll hear Abraham singing in this clip, he talks a lot about the people's power in El Alto, the state repression, and the need for a revolution in Bolivia. And this is all.
This was pre-Evo. And these people would be the hip-hoppers, if that's what you call them, or that
hip-hop artists. Yeah.
They would be more or less in support of Evo Morales and part of his political. So it'd be like the people are really in support of it. So it would have been a precursor to the evolution. And it's interesting, El Alto is a place where they've had a lot of revolutionary activity because La Paz is down in that valley, and there's been earlier revolutionary movements that's focused on El Alto and so forth. But that's at La Paz, and La Paz is 12,500 feet, or the Altiplano is really high altitude. But it's a very interesting country in the heart of South America. And we're talking now with Ben Dangl. He's written a really well-written book. It's really highly applauded. Let's let people see it again. And he's got a whole lot of other things going. This is in the bookstores now, I guess.
Yep, The Price of Fire, Resource Wars and Social Movements in Bolivia, published by AK Press, akpress.org. And it talks a lot about the social movements that led up to this current political leftist shift in Latin America, and a lot of the changes that are going on outside of the government on the ground among landless farmers, factory workers, coca farmers. So it's a great resource to help understand what's going on in Latin America, what led up to the people like Chavez, and what's going on outside of the government palace. And
Chavez and Morales. And maybe part of a trend. It's up in Ecuador now.
Right.
And other places. And nearly Peru. Yeah, okay.
And it's an enjoyable book to read, too.
It is. I'm here to testify. It's really well written. You well deserve the award. You won an award for a
Project Censored Award.
Yeah, congratulations on that. And you're also linked up, I think, with the National Writers Union.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah?
It's a great
See,
union.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So that's it. So let's run this tape. We just want to make sure it gets about 5 minutes or so. And here we go.
Somos reencarnación de la inmortal Pachamama. Aquí para los traidores se ha acabado la calma. Tengo una herida en el corazón tatuado que se ha quedado bien marcado. Todavía recuerdo aquel día que han disparado a mi pueblo de un helicóptero, matando al hermano campesino y minero que reclamaba sus derechos. En vez de solucionar han dejado más muertos, corazones deshechos. Aquí estamos presentes, inmortales, bien duros, compañeros de los suburbios oscuros, contando esta historia para que no se olviden y se graben en su memoria. Por aquí me dicen a la policía y a los militares se los respeta, porque entonces a mi pueblo le han apuntado en la cabeza con la metralleta. Una ráfaga de ametralladora corta la voz del pueblo, de la gente luchadora, trabajadora. Decenas de cuerpos ya son acallados en el seco suspiro de la muerte, ya están desangrados. Se ven disparos por todos los lados, fuegos cruzados, gente muerta en cada esquina. Nuevamente suena la metralla asesina. Tas, tas, todavía esta maldad por aquí camina, pero estamos conscientes de la meta que nos ilumina. El pensamiento único: amar, luchar por la libertad. Tú eres la fuerza viva para cambiar o aniquilar esta maldad. Amar, luchar por la libertad. Tú eres la fuerza viva para cambiar o aniquilar esta maldad. Que no me hablen de libertad, sentados en la indiferencia, conjuntos que simulan pedir para el pueblo clemencia. Tampoco cacareen que van a acabar con la malicia, si están pisoteando en el altar a la justicia. La moral del pobre, defender al pueblo con honor, como dice el himno nacional. Morir antes que esclavos vivir, pelear con valor, que nadie escupa sangre para que otro viva mejor. Basta de seguir viendo a los pueblos con dolor. Aquí vuelve Tupac Atari, siendo millones inmortales de los pueblos originarios, tales cuales somos verdaderos guerreros, listos para la lucha los mineros, sangre de guerrilleros, apoyando el movimiento aquí los callejeros, uniendo fuerzas con los hermanos cocaderos. A mi pueblo nadie lo para, aquí está para defender el originario, quechua y aymara, bla bla. Milico dispara la bala, nadie dice nada con una metralla, si mi pueblo lo calla, bla bla. Se ve que te muerta, gritos de alerta, sangre en el piso, no te hagas el hizo hecho al matón cabrón, mejor es que pidas perdón, pom pom pom. Yo quiero decirte que ondas, que putas, somos hijos de cholas, tenemos bien puestos las bolas, rompiendo el esquema de este monstruo sistema. Y aparecieron más mujeres bartolinas, con pura ira, firmes campesinas. Ya vuelve Tupac Atari, estamos aquí, verdaderos originarios que van creciendo todos los años en territorios bolivianos. Ya somos varios, como el comandante Che Guevara, revolucionarios, pichando la coca para acabar con esta gente que nos provoca. Aquí estamos y no nos vamos, a la cultura representamos, siempre con mano dura. Parece que tienes duda, rayate con mi raza, vas a ver que igualito te tortura. Amar, luchar por la libertad. Tú eres la fuerza viva para cambiar o aniquilar esta maldad. Amar, luchar por la libertad. Tú eres la fuerza viva para cambiar o aniquilar esta maldad.
Hey, bravo! That's great, man. That's great. It made me reminiscent of when I was there, that panpipe and everything. It's just so I want to get you to get a chance to let everybody have your sights and so forth. But I want to say, you said they sometimes rap in
Aymara.
Aymara.
Right.
That's really great, the native language. Do they integrate it in and everything?
Yeah, some other songs have Aymara, Quechua, Portuguese. Abraham spent some time in Brazil. Abraham was the main rapper there. So they bring a lot of indigenous culture, languages into their music.
And they've got some guitar. What are the music? They got the pipes. They got the traditional
drums,
thing. Yeah, drums. They had drums like that. They didn't have guitars in the Aymara tradition, but they integrate that all into a hip hop thing. And has this got popularity in Bolivia?
Yeah.
Has it got popularity in South America?
Yeah, it's definitely growing, and particularly among young people in Bolivia and in El Alto and La Paz. It's a growing movement.
And has it got some popularity on a world scale? That's like part of world music. It's really good.
Totally.
The hell of a beat is really good, don't you think?
Yeah.
You're an aficionado of hip hop?
I like listening to it.
We got a lot of people who view the program. I think it's really good. It should be selling in the streets of Manhattan, do you think? And it's got a revolutionary thing. And these people, this youth, would be in support of Evo. And the youth of Latin America, perhaps, or of the world might be in also.
Support of Evo. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of, I have to say, there's all kinds of contradictions and problems with the government. But in general, it's a very hopeful situation now in Bolivia.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the best things that could happen is that these movements that we've talked about could keep Evo radical and could radicalize some of his policies and
that's
make sure he doesn't shift to the right.
What do you think about Lula? Has Lula lost the luster, or what do you think in Brazil? What do you think of that? He came on very strong and everything, but some people think, I mean, the thing is, there's a lot of special interests who are trying to drag down any kind of a revolutionary change always, right? It's a hard thing to fight against. But talk to that a little bit, and then we want to make sure we get all your websites and all that information.
I think that, like I said, one of the best aspects of the current situation in Bolivia is that there is this people's power outside of the political sphere, outside of the government, that could keep Evo and keep his government accountable and push for further redistribution of land, full nationalization of gas, full nationalization of the mines. And that's what makes Bolivia different from these other progressive governments, is that it has this very strong people's power from below that could keep Evo radicalize him even further.
Wonderful. And I'd like to say that that's still in the spirit of public access cable television, and its sister institutions within the Internet is the same. We can maybe keep it radical and keep it going for public access because we're not tied into special interests of the corporate so much as is the corporate and so forth. So there's a singularity of that. We're almost right out of time. So Ben, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now, what more? We're going to run your graphic or run your credit roll here, and they're going to put up your your contact information, but people can be in touch with you. And one more time, we'll tell them about the book.
Yeah, the book.
Let's show them that. Do you mind if I put it up?
The Price of Fire, Resource Wars and Social Movements in Bolivia.
You don't mind me putting it up?
It's great.
Okay, good, yeah.
And I'm on a book tour right now. We're doing readings in different cities around the East Coast, going out to Burlington, Vermont, Boston, Chicago, coming back to New York. And information on the book, how to order it, where you can order it from, and where we're going on the book tour is at boliviabook.com.
Okay, boliviabook.com. Have you got that, everybody? Write it down. Bolivia, B-O-L-I-V-I-A, BOOK.com.
Boliviabook.com.
Let them know how they can get in touch with you.
How to get in touch with me, my email's on that website, bendongle@gmail.com, and all the information about the book.
That's a great name, Bendongle.
Boliviabook.com.
That's got a nice ring to it, doesn't it, Bendongle? That's Dutch, right?
Right.
Yeah, Bendongle.
Yeah.
That could be a real trademark name almost. That's a good name. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks
in.
a lot
Pleasure.
for having
Glad
me.
we were able to catch you while you're in New York. Good on the book tour. And thanks a lot for. Are you thinking to go back to Bolivia, or are you?
Definitely, yeah.
You are in the near term. You're thinking of going back
within the year. Go back down
within the year to go and
keep on writing.
Okay.
Keep on writing.
And you've written for Z
Magazine,
Nation?
The Progressive, The Nation.